Good afternoon. Welcome to Cleaning and Maintenance Management's 2019 Restroom Care webinar, Grout Doubts and Odor Obstacles, brought to you by our publisher, ISSA, and our sponsors, Kivak, Torque, and WizKid Products. My name is Amy Richardson, and I'm the Managing Editor for CMM. Thank you for joining us. CMM offers several resources for facility managers, in-house service providers, and building service contractors. Visit cmmonline.com to subscribe to our magazine and sign up for our daily news. And be sure to connect with us on Twitter and Facebook. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. We invite you to submit questions for our presenters to answer today. Open up the Questions tab on the right-hand toolbar and type your questions at any time during the presentation. We will have Q&A sessions after each presentation and at the end of the hour. If you have technical issues, call GoToWebinar support at the numbers listed here. All participant phones are automatically muted through the webinar system. However, feel free to mute your phone now as an extra precaution. All registrants will receive an archived recording of today's webinar by email. A download of this presentation will also be available within the next week on our website. Thank you again for joining us today. Before we get started, here's a quick message from our first sponsor. Restrooms are costly and difficult to maintain. With the highest cleaning costs per square foot in a building, they are also the #1 source of customer complaints. That's why Kivak invented no-touch cleaning and OmniFlex crossover cleaning. These common-sense, science-based cleaning systems quickly wash away customer complaints and create reliably clean restrooms. Visit Kivak.com and click on Restroom Cleaning to learn more. Now I would like to introduce our first presenter, Chris Wallace. Chris is an experienced operations and custodial management professional who has been making a difference in the cleaning industry for the past 18 years. Chris currently works as the Assistant Director of Custodial Operations at Wake Forest University and is the owner of Dynamic Cleaning Solutions. He is a consultant for CMI Cleaning Change Solutions and has been instrumental in training and successfully transitioning organizations that range from building service contractors to large corporations and universities. Now, Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about odor obstacles. Can you go to the next slide for me, Amy? When it comes to odors in restrooms, we're really talking about two different things. It's either coming from pipes, which is either inefficient flow, a drain that's clogged, or typically a drain that's dry. But outside of pipes, typically what we're talking about is the buildup of bacteria, urine, or other organics or bodily fluids that have built up and are causing the odors in a restroom. Most of this comes back to, unfortunately, ineffective cleaning on a consistent basis. Whether you look at porous surfaces like grout and some tile and the urine or other liquids that can get stuck or trapped there, or you're looking at just inside the cracks and crevices in urinals or toilets or around the bases and around the toilets themselves, there's a lot of different places that odors can come from. But as we start talking about odors, I just want to set the record straight. Restrooms should be odor neutral. It's okay for a restroom to smell like a restroom. Doesn't necessarily need to be masked by smelling like peaches, blossoms, or blue raspberry. In the same extent, it shouldn't smell awful as well. So we're going to take the next little while and we're going to talk about how we can clean effectively inside restrooms, and in so doing, eliminate many of the obstacles and the odors that we find in the restrooms themselves. Amy, can you go to the next slide? One of the things that we don't want to do, and I think we all find ourselves in this situation all too often, is putting out fires. Someone calls and complains, whether it's a dirty restroom or it smells, and we rush in, we make a quick plan, we get all the people in there, we fix the issue. But we don't actually fix the problem. What we did is we just made it temporarily better, and then it's just going to be a matter of time before that person or that client or someone from that department is going to be calling again, only to complain about the same things that they've already complained about. So as we talk about these things today, we want to talk about ways that we can sustain the change of taking restrooms from where they are to where they need to be and eliminating odors on the way. We're going to do that by talking about the importance of workloading, the importance of training, having a good quality assurance program, and outside of all of that, taking into account the culture. Because if we don't change the culture, we're really not going to be able to sustain any change or improvement that we make in the restrooms long term. We're going to end up going back and fixing the same problem over and over again. Now, when we first start looking at how to effectively remove odors and eliminate issues and cleanliness issues in the restrooms, where we need to start is a baseline. Can you go to the next slide for me, Amy? So when we talk about baselines, we need to understand where we are. Can you go to the next slide, Amy? When we're looking at restrooms, do our restrooms look like this restroom on the left? Or does it look like the restroom on the right? Each one, in its own accord, could have odor issues. But we need to understand what condition they're in and what needs to be done to be able to bring them back into tolerance. Now, maybe the one on the left, it might be that we're not going to just be able to throw some employees in there and just clean, and it's going to make the difference that we need. We might need equipment that's specifically built to bring those areas back up into tolerance. And then our daily cleaning would then just be maintaining the restroom in its clean and odorless state. Now on the right, it might be that it's just detail cleaning and some changes that we need to make in our process to ensure that edges and crevices are cleaned correctly and that we eliminate any of the standing bacteria or germs that may be present in the restroom itself. Can you go to the next slide, Amy? As we look at where we are and we set our baseline, we need to understand where we need to go from there. And to be able to know where we need to go, we need to workload. We need the building to tell us what it needs, instead of just walking around with a cookie cutter approach that just, oh, well, it works here, so it must work there. Workloading is a process of looking at all the fixtures in a restroom, identifying the tools that are needed to clean them effectively on a daily basis, as well as the chemicals and the cleaning processes and times associated with getting the restrooms into tolerance and keeping them there. So as you workload, you're going to be looking at things like how many fixtures are in a restroom? How long are those going to take to clean? What's the density in the areas that they're located in as far as population is concerned? Are there times we need to work around? Maybe they're on break when we want to be cleaning restrooms and we can't close them down, and it's going to inhibit the employees from being able to do the jobs effectively and cause odors and cleanliness issues in the long term. Many times we're way too quick to throw our employees into an area, say, hey, you've cleaned restrooms before, right? Well, yeah. Well, then go off and do what you do. And they walk into a building and they look at these restrooms and they see just like this picture. They don't know where to start. They don't know which way to go. They just know that they're supposed to do something. And I think anyone who's worked in the custodial world for a period of time knows that employees are very creative and they're going to figure out a way to do whatever they feel like they need to do, whether it's right or wrong. They're just going to try to get it done. And workloading is going to give us the opportunity to not only set up those routes, that's going to tell them where they should go, what they should do, and how long that's going to take, but it's also going to give them the availability to have flowcharts that tell them inside of a restroom, this is where you should start. These are the things that you should do in this order, and this is where you should end. And what that does is that creates an environment where you don't have employees cleaning toilets and urinals and then running over and cleaning the the countertops and sinks with the same rags, but also not trying to mop the floor before they've cleaned anything else, or trying to dust after they've already cleaned many of the horizontal surfaces. So it ensures that when they've spent the time in the restroom, that time has been effective and efficient, and they're leaving the restroom in a state that's been predetermined because you have a process that's built on. And if you don't have a process, you can't really have an expectation. And without a process or an expectation, you can never really have a predetermined outcome, which is, in this case, clean and odor-free restrooms. Can you go to the next slide, Amy? Training is another vital part. As I mentioned before, we're far too quick to just throw an employee in and assume that common sense is going to teach them how to do it. Or we'll send a supervisor or a lead to go train an employee, or an employee who's been there for 30 years, and we just send them in. Well, they all have their own jobs and things that they've got to do, and so they show up and, they ask them, have you done this before? Well, yeah, I clean my mom's house sometimes, or I used to work for XYZ company. And they say, well, that's fantastic. Here, I'm going to give you this stuff. You're going to clean these restrooms. I'm going to be back in a little while. And they're off and doing whatever they're going to do. And this, once again, we've left them up to their own decisions as to what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So in training, what we're going to do is we're going to take the time to treat them like professionals, because that's what they are. And we're going to invest the time to help them understand why the change is needed. Change is never easy. And when we talk about culture change later, it's a big part of it. People don't like change. They don't adjust well to it typically. But we know that as they understand the reasons behind the change, that they're much more willing to accept it and to use it going forward. You can do all the training in the world, but if they don't understand or believe in what you trained, as soon as you turn around and walk away, they're going to go back to doing things how they've always done them before, because that's what they know. That's what's easy for them. The other part about training that's important is they need hands-on training. So as we talked about in work loading, that it needs to be with specific equipment and with specific chemicals, and all of that stuff needs to be identified. Well, in training, we're going to take all of that equipment that was workloaded for the buildings that you're going to work in, and we're going to train hands-on specific on that equipment. And you can say, well, isn't a mop a mop? Well, yes and no. You can take a big yellow mop bucket and a big cotton heavy mop, and you can hand it to a person, and they can probably figure out how to stick it in the water and strain it out and go mop a floor, and maybe they will look down and see the water gets dirty and change it, and maybe they won't. But what about a flat microfiber mop with a dual chamber mop bucket? They'll look at that and go, well, what is this? How do I use it? What do I do? And so we want to make sure that as we're buying high tolerance tools to make their jobs more effective and easier, that we're training them so that to take out the guesswork of what they're going to have to do. So once they've been trained, even if we put them into a new building, they're not worried about what they're using or how to use it. They're only really concerned with learning the building, following the job cards or the route cards that were created during the work loading process, and then identifying back with the person who did the work loading if there's any issues that come up because of it. Once we've done training and the employees are out and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, we're going to start talking about the next part of the process, which is quality assurance. Amy, can you change the slide for me? Now, we have to have a quality assurance program. And when I say a quality assurance program, I don't just mean that we can walk around with an iPad or a white piece of paper and we're doing a white glove test throughout the building or throughout the restrooms. Or in this case, we're just walking in to see if it smells clean. I'm really talking about a full quality assurance program that takes more than just the white glove assessment into account. And many times we call this a PAL assessment. So we need to take into consideration the P, which is the people in the process. Are the people where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing, with what they're supposed to be doing it with, right? And that's going to help us understand if there is issues in the restrooms, to start to identify what needs to change, whether it's retraining, whether it's part of the process that was broken that we didn't take something into consideration, whether the workloading was wrong based on some wrong information that we were given ahead of time. It's all part of ensuring that it's not just data that sits in a database or that sits on a piece of paper. It's actually information that we can use that's going to make a difference and help us move forward. Now, the A in PAL is obviously the cleaning assessment, the appearance assessment. And really, that's your white glove test. Is the restroom clean? Is it dust free? Is it does it smell good? What is the status of the restroom itself or any other parts of the building? And then the L is logistics. And when we do workloading, the other thing that we're taking into consideration is janitor closets. How many are there? Are we lucky enough to have some that are maybe by restrooms that we can stock and do things to maximize the efficiency of the employees as they're walking throughout the buildings? Are they clean and organized? I think we've all seen where a customer walks into a closet and looks and there's stuff everywhere and everything looks dirty, and we have to not question the fact that they're questioning in their head that if you can't keep a closet clean and organized, what are you doing in their buildings? And so the logistics piece is really identifying, are they set up correctly, but are they also clean and organized and have the right things to make sure that our employees have what they need at the time that they need it. After we look at the quality assurance program, which is really starts at the beginning with a baseline and is ongoing, one of the things to consider too is maybe a third-party audit now and then to validate that what your staff is doing and looking at is actually what it really is. Now we can go through everything that we've talked about. We can workload, we can identify all of the issues that we have, we can have the process set, we can move forward with training and getting the employees in the right frame of mind. And then we can be checking up behind them. But if we don't take the next thing into consideration, it all doesn't make a difference. And that's going to be culture change. Can you change that for me, Amy? Really, when we talk about culture change, we're talking about identifying the behaviors that control why the employees do what they do. So many times, I guess if it's your style to just run and yell and point your finger and tell someone they're going to do what you're telling them or you're going to fire them, it's never going to get that sustained change. Fear is never going to get an employee to where they need to be. And so as we start to understand those behaviors as why the employees do what they do, we can start to identify through training, through follow-up and retraining and other things to be able to change the morale and how they feel about what they do. As they go through training, they learn about being a professional. They really start to feel that what they do is really valuable and important. And we want to feed off that as we go through, whether it's from remembering to say the good things and not just the bad. I mean, really, when we look at custodians, what are we talking about? We're talking about the first persons that are blamed for everything that goes wrong and the last ones that are ever thanked when things go right. And so as we work on changing that culture piece, we're able to sustain the changes and keep areas cleaner for longer periods of time. And sometimes that means that leadership needs to kind of sit back and look at themselves and understand how are they contributing, whether positively or many times negatively, to the culture of their staff and their employees. And I think through the list that I've laid out for everyone here, through having a baseline and a quality assurance program, through workloading correctly and identifying all the needs that needs to happen for an employee to be able to successfully do their job on a daily basis, through training to ensure that they know how to use the equipment and they know where to go and how to do it, to the culture change at the end, that we're able to stop just living this life of putting out fires and getting the calls about issues in restrooms all the time. We're actually able to start to concentrate on building more processes and moving forward, because the process is set up in such a way that it starts to run itself and we have the outcome that we wanted because we built and put into place the process that needed to be there. Next slide. think that's it.
Thank you, Chris. We received a few questions from our audience that we'd like for you to answer now. How do you plan for covering restrooms when you are short-staffed?
It's a challenge, especially if you haven't planned for it. So I think a lot of times what happens is, as organizations, we put our staff in place as if everything's going to be perfect every day, and don't take into consideration that people get sick. They have family emergencies. They have cars that break down. Life happens. And so I think really what needs to happen is you need to have a plan ahead of time. But especially when it comes to restrooms, there's really not a spot that you walk away from when it comes to restrooms, because of the germs and the bacteria that are there. You're going to end up short staffing and doing some things outside of restrooms to help maximize your time that night with the staff that you have. But when it comes to restrooms, you're always going to clean the restrooms like you should every night, whether you're short staffed or not.
Okay. Next question. How do you sell and negotiate with owners the importance of this service?
How do you sell and negotiate with owners? It's a challenge. I think that owners, a lot of times, in my experience, are concerned with one thing, and that's typically money and finances and continuing to make their business grow and move forward. And so I think part of the understanding when we talk with owners is they need to understand the importance of these pieces. And if we can talk to them and we can help them to understand how this only builds their business and helps the business move forward, it's a lot easier thing to understand and for them to buy off on, when they can see that there's going to be a benefit not only to their finances as a company, but also to their staff, as far as the time that goes into retraining, when it goes into trying to hire new staff. If you can keep those numbers down because your morale is good and your training is good, so you don't have people out with accidents and other things that obviously financially have a very large cost as well, it can be a fairly easy conversation at that point to be able to sell them and help them move forward.
Okay, thank you. One attendee asks, I'm working on a color-coded microfiber program for my operation. Red cloths will be used for restroom toilets and urinals. How many toilets, urinals can I clean with one cloth? It's
a question of the day, and it really comes down to, I think, training. So when we look at microfiber cloths and we look at, a process in general, color coding, especially in the team cleaning, world, there's nothing better. And I think that that's huge because it keeps us from cross-contaminating and using any of those things in other areas of the building. But I think that microfiber itself, you've got to fold. So if you just grab a microfiber and you just wad it up and you go through a building, the first thing that it touches, you've basically soiled every side of a cloth. Whereas if you keep a cloth folded and you continue to unfold it and move it around so that you have clean sides that you're working with, you can do a lot more. And it's really going to depend on a lot of things. So there's not a concrete answer. The one thing I will tell you, however, though, is if it's just a toilet and a sink in a restroom, I'm never going to take that microfiber that I used to clean that little small restroom and use it in another one. I'm always going to start a new restroom with new microfiber every time.
Okay, thank you. What is better, doing your own workloading or using a software system?
Workloading is a challenge. So, depending on your workloading program and how well you have it dialed in, it might be better for you to use it. I have yet to see a software-based program that really answers all the questions that needs to be answered when it comes to workloading. And so software is difficult for me. I know that there are some consultants out there that specialize in workloading, which can be a huge asset. And I think that's probably, if I'm lacking in that part and being able to do workloading on my end, I think probably the best solution is to probably hire someone to come in and teach you how to do it, or take some classes to really learn and lock it in, so that you're ensuring that when you do it on your own, that you're doing it specific to your organization and that you're meeting all the needs that you need to meet.
Do you recommend color coding when it comes to cleaning?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of color coding. I think it's a necessity. In the places where I've worked, and including where I work now, everything's color coded. The rags, the equipment, down to the chemicals that we use, down to the SDS sheets. Everything is color coded and matches. So it takes all the guesswork out of what you do. You know, just a quick example, if I'm walking through and I use red as my restroom color, if I'm walking through outside of restrooms and I see someone cleaning with a red microfiber or red chemical, or I see a red mop or mop bucket, I automatically, without seeing anything else that's happened, know that the process is broken, and I know that we're cross-contaminating from the restrooms outside into other areas. And so I think for the visual piece that it gives not only supervisors and managers and directors and assistant directors, but also the ease that it gives employees. You know, I can't think of anything worse than walking into a closet and going, okay, I got to go mop the floors in the restroom, and not knowing, or in a kitchen, and not knowing which one you just used in the restroom. You know, I think that's not an environment that we want to put any of our staff in, but it's what happens. And so color coding eliminates all of that. They just have to grab the color that corresponds to what they're doing and move forward.
What is the maximum number of rooms a custodian can clean in a night, in your opinion?
There's so many factors that go into that. I would love to just have a concrete answer and go, it's this. But it changes. Every building's different. You know, and so what shifts are there? Are they 10-hour shifts? Are they 8-hour shifts? Are they 4-hour shifts? Is it a 7-day-a-week facility, or is it a 5-day or a 2-day-a-week? There's so many different things that go into it that it's an impossible question to just be able to answer. I think that part of the issue that we run into when it comes to workloading and when it comes into managing how much an employee can do comes back to many times the people in management have never really done what they're expecting the employees to do. And that's not to say good or bad about anyone, but some of the best ways to really understand what's going on in a building, roll your sleeves up, go out and do it. You're going to understand pretty quick if your numbers are off or if they're correct. But validation is part of workloading. It's part of what we do. There's also books that you can look at that give you, average times that it should take to clean different areas that you can experiment with and see how that works in your given facilities. I know a lot of people that have also done time studies where they have done workloading, they set everything up, and then they go out and they have literally a stopwatch. And they're with their employees and they're timing how long it takes them to do some of these things to validate that the numbers that they have are correct.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. We'll take more questions later in the program. Before we introduce our next speaker, we have a sponsor message from Torque, the #1 global professional hygiene brand. From transport terminals and airports with varying levels of traffic to office buildings and higher education facilities where hygiene and reputation are key, different industries face unique challenges. However, when it comes to dirty and overcrowded restrooms, industries face similar challenges such as staff spending too much time checking and refilling dispensers, disrupted traffic flow if the restrooms are being serviced, and space constraints. That's where Torque PeakServe can help. This revolutionary system sets a new standard for efficiency and performance in high-traffic restrooms thanks to its compressed continuous hand towel feature, which delivers towels one at a time without jamming, allowing you to serve more people without refilling. The system helps you excel during critical moments by requiring less time from staff, improving flow, and being more space efficient, With 250% more hand towels and quicker drying time, Torque Peak Serve improves both guest and cleaning staff experiences. To learn more, visit torqueusa.com/peakserve. Our next presenter is Stan Hulin. Stan has over 4 decades of industry experience. He has worked for such companies as ABM, DuPont Flooring Systems, and Millicare Textile and Carpet Care. He is currently president and CEO of Future Floor Technology, Inc. and the League of Hard Flooring Professionals. He is a national and international consultant for chemical equipment and janitorial supply distribution companies and has conducted hard floor maintenance seminars all across the globe. He has been involved with IICRC since 1998 and has held many positions within the organization. Stan, I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Chris for giving us a great little rendition of how cleaning in the restroom impacts everything. So my side of this goes directly to the bottom. We're gonna be talking about the floor. And as you're gonna see on the next slide, we're going to be talking about general restrooms, specifically the restroom. Now, the focus of this particular webinar is going to be on cleaning ceramic tile and grout. We all know that restrooms come in many different flavors, from resilient flooring materials such as sheet vinyl, VCT, and LVT, LVP becoming more popular. We're starting to see a lot of different types of flooring materials in restrooms, and each one of those different flooring materials may require a different floor maintenance method or methodology for dealing with the problem. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about why is ceramic floors so popular in the restroom. First of all, let's take a quick look at what are ceramic or clay classifications within the category of ceramic. You've got your basic glazed and unglazed ceramic tile that we're all very familiar with, from 1 inch to 2 inch to 4 or 5 inch ceramic tiles. Porcelain is making a great headway into the environment, and we're starting to see a lot more porcelain in the environment now than we used to see. Quarry tile, although it doesn't make much of a dent into the restroom environment, is still part of the clay category. And then you also have bricks and terracotta. And although those types of flooring materials are clay, we don't often see them in a restroom, but that doesn't mean that we'll never see them in a restroom. So the first thing you have to understand is that the ceramic clay classification is used in certain environments because of its durability. In the next slide, we're going to talk about what is that durability. The durability comes from, excuse me, from the ceramics ability to absorb or not absorb water. And we have different ways of measuring this. And I like to look at things scientifically. So what does that really mean? Well, when you're talking about non-vitreous, we're talking about a clay product that can absorb 7% or more water. This is the type of clay product that you might have outside, or maybe in a swimming pool area or something of that nature. We get into semi-vitreous, which means that product will absorb 3 to 7% water, which is a little bit better, but not much. We then get into vitreous, which is 0.5 to 3%, and finally impervious, which is 0 to 0.05% water. Most ceramic tiles that are used in restrooms are of the impervious variety. And this impervious variety makes it perfect for being able to block or the inability to allow water to absorb into the product. In the next slide, one would think that because we have an impervious body, that this ceramic tile is going to be perfect for restrooms. It's going to be the ideal situation because nothing can penetrate into that tile. It's impervious. It's full of everything. It cannot be penetrated by urine or water or anything else. That means that anytime we see ceramic in a restroom, it's perfect. Well, Chris talked about a little bit about cleaning the top to the bottom. There's one thing about floors that you need to understand. Floors, the definition of a floor is the inside bottom surface of any room. If you're in a building, you're on a floor, and they go from anywhere, they range anywhere from functional to artistic. There's no telling what you're going to see in a floor. But there is one thing that you can definitely count on. Gravity takes over and everything ultimately ends up on the floor. And in the bathroom, it's the trickle-down effect. We get urine in the grout lines. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about why is that so difficult? Even though the ceramic floor itself may be impervious, what about the grout? What about those grout lines? That's where we always run into problems. And the reason we run into problems is because traditionally in the restroom, you're going to see sanded grout. And although there are different types of grout out there, non-sanded, latex additive, epoxy, and furon, there are a number of different types of grout out there, but what we usually associate with the restroom is sanded grout. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So what are the challenges with all grouts? One thing is that they reside lower than the tile. It is very, very rare that you will find that the grout line is above the tile line. So what happens is water seeks the path of least resistance and it goes to the lowest point, and guess what? It deposits whatever it's carrying into that lowest point, and as the water evaporates, because water does what water does, it wants to go back to a gaseous state and get in the environment, the water itself will evaporate. But what about the soil? It's not going to get airborne. It's not going to get into the air. It's going to remain in the grout line. So when we talk about grout lines, we have to also talk about soil. We have to identify what type of soil will you find in a restroom. Well, you're going to find all kinds of soil. You're going to find organic soil that comes from people's body, that comes from washing your hands, comes from soap and other things. And then you're going to have non-organic soils, which may be grease and grime that is tracked into the restroom from the kitchen around the corner or from the outside that you come through the entrance. The point is that whatever soil gets introduced into the environment, it's going to be carried to the lowest point and deposited. In the next slide, we go into a little bit more detail about the restorative maintenance process. Now, as Chris said earlier, you have to have a baseline. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about reestablishing the baseline, because oftentimes I never get called in to look at a clean restroom floor. That's never happened to me. I usually get called in because the floor is trashed and people say, how am I going to fix this? How do I correct this? And so we have to start with a baseline. And although there are a number of different cleaning mechanisms out there and different methodologies, what I'm going to focus on today is pretty much the cleaning method that most janitorial companies can achieve, because this is the type of equipment, tools, and materials that you can traditionally find in their janitor closet. On the next slide, we're going to get into a little bit of the details about that. So before you can begin cleaning anything, before you can even begin talking about your equipment or chemistry or tools and materials, you have to identify those soiling conditions. So, what kind of soil are you looking at? Because after all, floor maintenance is just the interaction between one surface and another. Usually the surface, in this particular case, we're going to be talking about ceramic tile and grout, and the soil itself. So all floor maintenance is the interaction between two surfaces. So what is on the surface that you need to remove? That's the first question you have to ask. And if that happens to be floor finish, now I know that you shouldn't have to put floor finish on ceramic tile, but if I had $1 for every ceramic tile I went into that had a floor finish on it, I wouldn't be on this conversation. We'd be making lots of money. So the first thing you got to do is establish, does this flooring material ceramic or porcelain in a cementatious sanded grout binder, will this be having floor finish on it? If it has floor finish on it, that will put you in one area that you need different chemistry to even approach it. And before you can even approach the next case, which would be heavy soiling, which is usually just organic and non-organic materials that are deposited in the grout line. So the ceramic tile conditions themselves are usually not very bad, and ceramic tile and porcelain tile are usually relatively easy to clean because of the fact that they're impervious to soil penetrating into the surface. So an impervious tile means that you should be able to wipe off that tile relatively easy and get the soil off. However, we introduce into that situation texture, which is all the rage now. We're starting to see textured slate-like floors, slate, that has texture. So texture, i.e. the grout, is going to give you some added extra challenges. So grout, understanding that sanded grout, even though the ceramic tile itself may be impervious to penetration, the grout is porous and extremely susceptible to soil being ground down into the lowest points of the porosity of the grout. And you can't get a vacuum on a grout line, so it creates an issue. In the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the service preparation. Before you even go in to do a restroom, particularly if you're doing a restorative job, which is what we're kind of talking about here, you need to make sure that you have everything that you need. Number one, you need to be addressing that restroom in non-working hours. You are not going to be able to clean a restroom floor, particularly in a very aggressive method, if you have people tracking in and out of it. So it may sound stupid, but you've got to make sure that that restroom is free and clear of any pedestrian traffic whatsoever. Janitors work off of their work distribution sheets. So if you're a manager or a supervisor, be sure that you put the proper information on those work distribution sheets, because if you don't have the proper information on that work distribution sheet, such as the correct address, the alarm code, where that particular restroom is, what you want done with that particular restroom, if you don't have that on the worksheet, your janitor doesn't stand a chance of getting it cleaned correctly to begin with. Second, you need to make sure that you've got all the equipment that you need for performing the service. There is nothing worse than getting out to a job. Say you take your rotary floor machine, but you forget the block. Well, a rotary floor machine without a pad holder or a block is good for being a boat anchor. That's about it, because it's not going to do anything if you don't have the block or the pad holder to address the flooring condition. Next, you need to make sure that you have all the cleaning chemicals that you want. And this is going to be predicated by what you're doing to the floor. If you have to strip and refinish the floor, then you're going to have to remove all of the finish first, and then you'll go into different things. Also, you have to make sure that you have plenty of safety cones and placards and caution and danger tape so that you can seal off the area completely. It's one thing for somebody to come into the area and says, oh yeah, I'll be careful. They'll be suing you if they slip and fall. So I always like to secure the area and make sure that there's absolutely no way that anybody's going to get into my work environment to cause me grief or to cause themselves some unfortunate problems. You'll need personal protective equipment. A lot of times the stuff that we use is hazardous to human health. I mean, we use razor blades and putty knives and harsh chemistry. And so you want to be sure that your employees, your janitors, or you are protected at all times. And one of the other things that I like to remind people of is do a vehicle inspection before you go to the job. This is like a restorative job, and it's going to take a lot of time. You want to make sure that you have everything there. If the vehicle doesn't get there, neither does anything else. So it's important to do a vehicle inspection. In the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about, next slide, please. The primary electrical equipment that you will use. And we're looking at, there are a number of different types of flooring equipment that we use in the floor maintenance industry, and it changes all the time. So I'm going to stick with traditional stuff, and then at the end of this, I will talk about some other stuff. But for now, you're going to use primarily a rotary floor machine. You might use a cylindrical brush machine. Some of you maybe have been introduced into the orbital floor machine. And then that's just for the agitation part. Then you need to have wet vacuum with a floor squeegee, or a wet vacuum with a wand and squeegee. And that's going to help you evacuate the contaminated solution off of the floor after you're done agitating it. Then you're going to need to have floor fans or air movers so that you can effectively dry the area so that you can see it within the boundaries of where it is. In the next slide, we go a little bit into the chemistry side, I believe. Yeah, so let's look at the chemistry side. If you have floor finish on your floor, the first thing you're going to want to do is strip off the old floor finish, because essentially what you have, the worst case scenario would be floor finish on a dirty, contaminated floor, because you've now encapsulated all the soil in a plastic film. So if you have a plastic film on it, you're going to want to use stripping products, and they're going to range from a pH of 10.5 all the way up to possibly 13. If you're just dealing with soil, dirty, greasy, grimy soil, then you'll probably want to go to a high alkaline product, which again could be a pH from 10 to 13. And the difference between a high alkaline product and a stripping product is stripping products have emulsifiers in them that have a tendency to break down old floor finish, whereas a high alkaline product is just there to break down grease. It doesn't have the added extra chemistry that would allow it to break down all of the floor finish that a stripping product would. If you go to the final step, you may have to use an acidic chemical, which may range from a 3 to as low as a 1 on the acid scale. And that's going to help you in the final stages of cleaning the grout by destabilizing the grout and making it a little bit easier to pry away the soil that's in it. So acidic chemicals, the alkaline chemicals break down the greasy and oily substances that are on the surface, whereas the acidic chemicals that are used after the alkaline chemicals have a tendency to destabilize the sanded grout, which allows you to take off a small amount of the grout to go below the soil and pull out all of the soil, and of course a little bit of the grout with it. So if you're going to use these harsh chemicals, and these are harsh chemicals, you're going to want to be sure that your employees are safe with personal protective equipment, and you also want to make sure that you have plenty of toweling materials to be able to blot up water, block water from going where you don't want it to go, and to keep your area managed by redirecting water, because water seeks the path of least resistance and goes to the lowest point. In addition to that, you're going to need some dry soil tools such as dust mops, brooms, foxtails, that kind of stuff. You may be using mops, mop buckets, and ringers. And again, I personally am a fan of the color-coded system. I think it's a great way to address your chemistry. If you're doing a full-fledged restoration, microfiber mopping systems are not the way you want to go. You want to go with either a wet vacuum system to totally evacuate it off of the floor, or mops, cotton mops or rayon mops that are highly absorbent to pull all of that soil off the floor. You might want a small pail, a 3-gallon pail to have water in to do your detailing with. You're going to want to have hand pads, you're going to want to have putty knife, and you're going to want to have a grout saw. all of this chemistry and chemical and tools and material are necessary for cleaning the floor. As you'll see on the next slide, as we go into the actual cleaning itself, we want to first off go to area preparation. There is no reason anybody should ever slip and fall on your watch. So you want to be sure to inspect the floor, make sure that there's no safety issues that are going to cause you grief, you know, studs sticking out of the floors, areas that's going to grab your pad or brush and cause you problems. You want to set your safety perimeter, and I usually set a series of safety perimeters, letting people know that they're coming into the area and then that they are in the area. You want to remove the obstacles. You want to set up step-off mats, which are either a carpet tile or a step-off mat that's right outside the door to wipe your feet on so that you're not tracking what you're doing throughout the rest of the building. You want to set up your soaking towels. You want to ensure that you have the proper ventilation in the environment, and you also want to assemble your equipment in the order that you're going to use it. That way you're not going to be wandering around for the next step over and over again. In the next slide, we actually start getting into the process itself, which is mixing the chemistry solution. Notice you have two slides here. One is the chemical side, which is on the left, and the other is the water side, which is on the right. Always use the manufacturer's recommended dilution ratios. And if you're going to have to step up your cleaning chemicals, always start from the least aggressive to the most aggressive. So in this case, I like to show the chemical X to the water Y, and that's why this is set up this way, is that you always want to follow the manufacturer's recommended dilution ratios, and you always want to make sure that you're accurate. A glug is not an accurate measuring method. You need to have a measuring cup or some other form of measuring to make sure that you're accurate. In the next slide, we talk about applying the solution liberally to the floor. Next slide, please. So we want to apply the stripping solution to the floor, and you want to apply, if you're stripping the floor, you'll go right to the stripping solution and strip the floor first. Then you may have to go and apply the alkaline solution and then go into the acidic solution. But if this floor doesn't have any floor finish on it, you go right to the alkaline solution and you mix it accordingly. And then you're going to machine agitate it. Now, when we're dealing with cleft irregular surfaces such as tile, you're going to want to go to brushes more than pads, because brushes will get down into the grout line and actually kick some of that stuff out. So always start with brushes. Sometimes if all you've got is a pad, it's going to be a little bit harder. Once you agitate the solution and pull up most of the soil out of it, then you're going to want to remove the solution. Now, traditionally, guys may have used a wet mop to wet mop the solution off, but a more effective way is a portable extraction system to get that contaminated floor slurry off of the floor. Now, it's important to, once you've pulled off the solution, you don't want to rinse the floor, and there's a reason for that. In the next slide, we want to go into making sure that you remove that grout cleaning solution. And once you have the grout cleaner, once you have the solution evacuated from the floor, in this case we're using a wand and squeegee attachment, then we're going to mix and apply our acidic cleaning solution. Now again, the acidic cleaning solution, its primary purpose is to destabilize the sand, the limestone specifically, or the calcareous material that's in the sanded grout, to destabilize it so that you can pull off a little bit of the grout itself to get lower than the soil. So you'll machine agitate that. Again, you're going to use a brush, and there are various brushes out there, various grits. When you're doing a restroom floor with the ceramic tile, you want to get a pretty aggressive medium to heavy grit brush to do that. So again, you remove the solution after you've agitated it, And again, you do not rinse the floor, and then you're going to proceed into detailing, which is the next slide. So once you get all of the floor cleaned up, there are a few types of tools that we can use to do the detailing. You can use a deck brush, which is a stiff bristled deck brush, will help you because you can then push that deck brush in the direction of the grout lines and be able to clean it up even a little bit more. You might use a scrub brush, but one of my particular favorites is the grout brush, which is a angled brush that you see down on the left-hand side. And then I also use a putty knife and a grout saw. The grout saw is on the right-hand side. So you'll always start with the least aggressive first. I would start with a deck brush. I would work my way to the grout brush. And if I still had a little bit of soiling in the grout lines, I would lightly agitate the grout saw into the grout lines and eliminate that. Now I'm going to tell you, you don't have to press down very hard on this grout saw because it's got carbide blades in it, and some of them are adjustable to different widths that will definitely pull away some of the grout. So you want to be sure that you go at it lightly. As you do this, as you become more familiar with it, you will learn how much pressure to apply in any given situation. If the soil is extremely bad, and I've seen some pretty extremely bad restrooms, you may have to go the additional mile and do the process over again. Remember, they don't call it hard floor maintenance because it's easy. And even though talking through it sounds like it's easy, when you get into the actual reality of it, it's pretty tough. So in the next slide please, we're going to do the final rinse. So after we get done taking care of the floor, we're going to apply a liberal amount of water, and this is for detailing purposes. We're going to wet vacuum any standing water that we left, and I always like to just put down a adequate amount of fresh water on the floor and just agitate it real quick and then suck it up with a wet vac, and then I'll thoroughly rinse it with clean water, and then I'll rinse water with a wet vacuum. We may have to rinse it several times before we get all of the where we're satisfied with the cleanliness of the grout. Finally, you want to wipe the cove bases with towels, and you might have to do some detailing where it goes up the wall a little bit. And then you want to finally use floor fans to expedite the drying time. Once the floor is dry, on the next slide, we'll see that you'll have a clean floor. And the final results here are going to be that the grout lines are going to be relatively free and clear of soil, and the edges, baseboards, and cove base are all going to be clean as well. So in the next slide, I think that might be it. I'm going to ask you for questions. But before I ask you for questions, once you get the floor clean, somebody surely is going to ask me whether you should seal the floor or not. And that is a question that you don't really need to seal the ceramic tile, but there are penetrating sealers that you can get for sealing the grout line. And there's a number of ways of applying them. One is to apply a liberal amount of sealant to the floor, let it sink into the grout lines, and then wipe up the excess. That's the traditional old method. Some people prefer to just put the sealer right in the grout lines, which is very arduous and time consuming. But you should absolutely put some kind of sealant back in that grout line. And I'm not a big fan of putting floor finish in restrooms. It creates an additional layer of challenges. So with that, I will also bring up the fact that once you get the floor clean, I would like to introduce everybody into the carpet world with portable extractors. There are now hard surface tools, pressurized spinning tools, grout tools, and corner tools that can be fitted for hard surfaces on a portable hot water extractor. And a lot of people are going to this methodology for maintaining the floors. They're not 100% great on a restoration process, but in the periodic and interim maintenance, they're absolutely terrific in keeping the soil out of the grout lines, because what they do is they have a pressurized stream that blows the soil up and out of the grout line, and an extraction vacuum that sucks it away so it's not settling back down on the floor. So with that, I'll open up the floor for questions.
Thanks, Stan. Yeah, we received a few questions during your presentation. One is, after restorative maintenance, do you recommend using a grout sealer?
Yes, I do. I absolutely think that grout sealing is one methodology for keeping the porosity of the grout from absorbing soil into the grout itself. It's just a thin film. It resides below the tile mark, but I do not recommend that the ceramic tile gets sealed, because once you seal the ceramic tile, you have a tendency to create other problems. I would also recommend that you do your research on the grout sealer that you choose. There are a number of them out there. I always lean towards the aqueous or water-based sealants as opposed to the solvent-based ones. We're fast moving away from solvent anything and moving to the aqueous arena.
Okay, thank you. How often should you be resealing the grout lines on restroom walls, especially around the urinal?
On walls? Restroom walls or floors?
This question is walls.
Okay, so getting usually the walls are the least problematic. Stalls that have, partitions will catch a lot of that urine splatter. That I'm sure that's what they're referring to. But if you keep, it's a vertical surface, so if you flush down the walls on a regular basis, you're going to be removing most of the urine that's on the wall. Part of the Chris's topic was wiping down everything before it hits the floor. What usually happens that we see a lot of is that 2 square foot underneath the urinal where it gets heavily soiled. And again, it's all about maintenance. Once you get it to a baseline, it's about the frequency in which you clean the surfaces to keep the surface free of urine and soil.
Okay, what is the best solution to keeping high traffic areas clean?
High traffic areas in a restroom. They're all high traffic areas. Once you get into the restroom, the secret is, it's no secret, it's just we choose not to accept the reality. If in a high traffic environment, I would never have a soiling problem if I had elves that would follow everybody that walked through and cleaned up the soil that they tracked in. But that's not realistic. So the solution is really simple. Do the least aggressive things more frequently, and you will have to do the most aggressive things less frequently. So for instance, if you've got a heavily trafficked, soiled restroom and you're cleaning it one time a day and you just can't keep up with it, maybe you should incorporate a second cleaning at a midpoint in the day. Maybe you should go in with a day porter and do some spot therapy throughout the day. It's about frequency. And to go to Chris's point earlier, he talked a little bit about what's the customer concerned with. The customer is concerned with the financial obligation of what they have to pay for that cleaning, because cleaning has no return on investment. it's somewhat of an illusion. We get the feeling that a clean building will attract customers, but the reality is cleaning has no return on investment. You're not going to make any money off of keeping your restrooms clean. So the best thing to do is do it as frequently as you possibly can. The more frequent you do the small stuff, the less frequent you have to do the heavy stuff.
Okay. For more regular maintenance, do you recommend peroxide cleaners? What other type products do you recommend for daily maintenance?
I don't recommend peroxide cleaners a lot. Stick with your general janitorial cleaning, and there's only a few that we deal with. The problem with peroxide cleaners or bleach cleaners is they get a buildup over time, and they start repelling things. So we usually use through this sequence. You go through neutral cleaners, which have a pH of 7 to 9. Then you might go to degreasers or general purpose cleaners. They go from 9 to probably 10 or 11. And then you go to degreasers, which go from pH 11 to pH 13. And then you have stripping chemicals that are anywhere from 10 to 13 about. So using the different chemistry and its appropriate time frame for periodic or restorative maintenance, understand your chemicals and what your chemicals do. And again, I always recommend starting from the least aggressive to the most aggressive.
Okay. Thank you, Stan. Now, before we open up for more questions, we have a final sponsor message from WizKid Products. WizKid Products is making the world a cleaner, better smelling place, featuring products that are designed to keep a facility cleaner in between cleanings. WizKid's antimicrobial mats protect floors from puddles, odors, and stains. Each mat is loaded with an industry-leading antimicrobial that kills 90% of the microbes that cause odor in the first 6 hours. The rubber backing is excellent at keeping the mat in place, and finally, the carpet-like texture is a step above traditional mats, and they air dry just like an entryway mat. The newest member of the WizKid antimicrobial mat line is the 25-foot runner mat. This customizable length mat comes in 2 widths, 24 and 36 inches, and features an acrylic-based tacky backing, allowing facility managers to have a customizable solution for any location where moisture management is an issue. The revolutionary Splash Hog vertical urinal screen is the only urinal screen on the market that goes up the back wall where guys actually aim. It is embedded with a 60-day fragrance and is strong enough to deodorize entire restrooms. This patented product also contains an enzyme to keep drains clear from buildup, voted 2018 and 2019 Product of the Year by janitorial distributors. WizKid Products, creating products to keep a facility cleaner in between cleanings and making the world a cleaner, better smelling place. For more information on all of these products, go to WizKidProducts.com. We have time for a brief Q&A session now. Again, if you have a question you'd like us to address, please type it into the questions box located on the tab on the right-hand toolbar. All right, Chris and Stan, feel free to answer these questions as they come in, and whoever wants to jump in, just go ahead. So any suggestions on how to clean around people in the building your whole shift?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, Chris, I believe this one's in your court.
So, I mean, I think that there's a few keys, if I understand the question correctly. One of those would be, one solution is to have a male and a female porter or employee that can go into those restrooms while they're being used. Obviously, in those situations, you aren't going to want to be mopping floors. You're really just going to be doing more like porter services or spot cleaning to get the areas back into tolerance until you can get in and do the heavy cleaning in the evening or in the off shift, whenever that may be. I think for a full restroom cleaning, every chance you get, you want to be able to shut it down mop and clean appropriately without having to clean around people is really what you're looking for there.
Okay. Should cleaners wear safety glasses to clean restrooms?
Well, I think this one's an easy one for me. Absolutely. So I don't think there's ever a time that an employee is ever using a chemical that they shouldn't have safety glasses on. In fact, typically I suggest that even if they're doing something in an area that's splashable, say they're working and they're taking out trash in areas and cafeterias and other things where there's sodas and a lot of things that could possibly splash back up into their face or into their eyes, that they use them as well. The one nice thing about safety glasses is they never hurt anybody and they can only help. So you can never use them really too much.
So to expand on that, I would say I would agree with you 100%, Chris, that what we're starting to see in the janitorial realm is constant protection. And by that, I mean, people will report to their job, they'll don their safety glasses, they'll don their rubber gloves and their personal protective equipment and pretty much wear it throughout the entire evening or the entire shift. You know, they may change it throughout the shift based on if you're cleaning a restroom, of course, you want to take off your gloves and change them for a fresh set of gloves. But I think safety is becoming much more applicable in the janitorial realm. Used to be that, you know, show some backbone, it's not that bad, but I always recommend that you take very, very good care of yourself because you're all you got. So glasses, gloves, any protection that you can get when you're working in a hostile environment, and a restroom can be considered a hostile environment, you're better off doing that.
Okay, thank you. What are some of the steps utilized in identifying odorous sources in a restroom?
Stan, do you want to start that one, or would you like me to?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you where the odorous comes from is that 2 square foot usually underneath the urinals, and foul odors from restrooms are not, you know, somebody burned the biscuits. It's usually a urine smell. It's usually pretty heavy. And if you don't guard it, as Chris had said earlier, and I'm going to pass it over to him in a minute, a lot of that urine gets flushed down the pipes, and then you have, if you have a floor drain system, then you have urine that's down in the floor drain system, and no matter how much you clean the surface of the floor, you're not going to get rid of the odor that's in the pipe that's in the floor drain system. And Chris, you could probably address that a little bit better.
Well, I think that one of the things too, Stan, thank you, that you need to look at is, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, right? Gravity takes effect. It's all going to go down. I think the other place outside of grout in the drains and the pipes you really find it is, especially in the grooves and the edges of the inside of the urinals, where employees come in, they do a superficial quick wipe down with a brush in the very front of a urinal, but don't take into consideration those back edges to each side. And then the urine builds up and builds up and builds up. And then after a while, it's just as bad as the grout down below because of the buildup that's there. So I think really identify the areas that's the dirtiest, which, Stan, to your point, is typically around the urinals or around the toilets. Do your inspections, identify where those areas are that could be causing it, typically urine, and then you can come up with a plan on what you need and how to clean it.
To expand on that, I'd like to jump in here, and if you're not moving the urinal screen, you're not cleaning underneath the urinal screen. If you're not changing, replacing, or flushing out the urine pads underneath the urine, it's just going to collect and the water will evaporate. The urine smell will emanate from being dried up in the urine screen. So the urinal screens and the urine pads that we have that we're using a lot nowadays, they have to be maintained as well. So pick up the urinal screen and clean down in the throat of the machine, the throat of the urinal, as well as around those edges, because that's if you never move that urinal screen, or you never flush out that urinal pad, then you're going to have urine odors.
Thanks. What is the best method for removing hard water deposits on all surfaces?
Acid.
It's number one. That's it.
And you've got to understand that there are different levels of acidic chemistry. Mild acid chemistry, you can buy a mild acid, and that'll take away some superficial calcium buildup, because most of those water deposits are based on calcareous type deposits. So acid will break down most water spotting, but you also have to use it safely and effectively. So acid is the number one thing when it comes to that particular type of removal.
Thanks. How often would you recommend pouring liquid into the floor drains, and should I use water or chemical to do that?
I would recommend. Go ahead, Chris. I'll let you handle it.
No, I'll point it out, and you'll probably have something else to add in, Stan, as well. Typically when you have a dry drain, the issue is that it's dry. I mean, there's the P-trap, which is the area just underneath the floor or whatever fixture the pipe is dry at, and it goes down and then it comes back up. And that piece right there, the P-trap, is built there to keep smells. The liquid will stop there and keep the smells from coming up from the sewer and back up through the drain. So the key in the end is ensuring that P-trap stays full to impede the smell and the odors from coming through the sewer system up. Now, you could have, I've been in buildings where we had to take that into consideration every week, just because of how the HVAC system worked and how the humidity in the building was. They just dried out really, really fast. And others, we did it once a month, once every 2 months. You kind of have to understand the environment that you're in and the region that you're in, and use that as an identifier of how often. And then once you kind of figure out what that frequency is, got to make sure you train your staff to stay on it, because it's an easy thing to forget. But typically about a half gallon of water will be more than enough to be able to fill up those P-traps and keep them. Stan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's not just water. Water is a great effective method of keeping the P-trap full, but I would also recommend incorporating a 3 to 7 strain enzyme to put in that water, and that will help to digest any of the urine or material that gets on the sidewalls of the P-trap or of the drain itself. And so when you do that, you've got enzymes that are constantly eating the natural organic materials. So if water's better than nothing, but if you use enzymes, that will help as well.
That's a good point.
Thanks for those answers, and thanks everyone for your questions. Before we conclude, I would like to thank our webinar sponsors, Kaivac, Torque, and WizKid Products, and our presenters, Chris and Stan. All of today's registrants will receive an email with a link to the archived presentation. We will also post a link to the webinar at cmmonline.com. Thank you for attending, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.